Welcome to IRMS London. We have two speakers tonight. Our first speaker is Christian Toon with Mental Health for Information Management Professionals.
So yeah, welcome to the next weekly version of webinars on Wednesday. I think it's now called IRMS Wow, basically. You can join in along the chat on either the chat function, which is the little bubble, speech bubble that says shows conversation. If you can't see it, Cecile has just said if you can't see the chat bubble, then you need to go out of the meeting and then come back and it will work. Thank you for that, Cecile. Basically, we have two speakers tonight, and if you just bear with me 2 seconds, we have Christian Toon, who's the, I don't know if you can see the little pictures, but he's already sharing his screen, and we'll start speaking shortly. And then we have Graham Snow afterwards. I don't really have anything else to say to you, because normally what happens here is that we have 4 meetings a year in a location in London somewhere, and I give you this grand rollout of what's actually happening within the IRMS. But there isn't actually that much when I speak to you every week. So this week we have just found out that we are going to be getting a better piece of webinar software. And it's currently being tested. It's been signed off and tested, and hopefully next week I will be able to use it, and then hopefully technical issues will stop. I have had some comments in relation to IRMS Wow being at 6:30, but the situation here is that I'm a volunteer. I'm full-timely self-employed, and so I can't actually do any of the webinars during the day because I'm currently trying to earn money to keep myself alive. But I do believe with the new webinar software is that some of the other group chairs will be able to hold webinars, and they should be doing some during the day as well. And so in that process means that there'll be more available. I just happen to react to the current situation as it is, and I've been borrowing favors all over the place. Thank you, Maria. So yes, basically is that I'm going to let Christian do his thing. So Christian Toon on mental health for information professionals. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. So good afternoon or early evening for you all. Thanks for coming along. When I'd originally kind of responded to Emily's request to come and sort of share some topics of stuff for these sessions, I was a bit hesitant, to be honest, about kind of talking about mental health, because it's really kind of, for me, it's been quite a tricky subject. And I guess whilst the title was very much dealing with mental health for information professionals, it all sounds rather grand. What I'm actually going to do is perhaps talk to you more about how I've come to realise how my mental health, and as much for you to take away your mental health, is important for everyone, wherever you are. My name is Christian Toon. I'm currently the Chief Information Security Officer for a law firm called Pinsent Masons. Based here in the UK, we've got offices around the globe, about 3,500 people in offices from Beijing to South Africa, France, Germany, to here in the UK. I've been with Pinsent Masons now for just coming up to 3 years, and I've been in the information management, information protection, data, etc., whatever you want to call it, sort of industry now for coming up to 2 decades. And kind of when I wrote that in my notes, I kind of realized that I was a lot older than what I thought I was. The experience I've had kind of comes from a variety of organizations across the globe, different geographies, both kind of public and private sector. I'm clearly not a mental health professional, so what I'm sharing with you here is kind of from my own experience. And like most good legal presentations, start with a disclaimer that this is very much my own view and is not necessarily based on any science, fact or otherwise. So please bear with me. It's also the first time I'm actually talking about this explicitly to anyone else in a public forum. So please bear with me. My slides are perhaps not quite there, but for me, it's important. I just want to get the message across and hopefully kind of share some insights with you.
Christian, just on that point, is that myself personally heavily endorse the idea that, you know, we should be talking more about mental health. I've suffered with depression since I was 12, so you know, I don't share that very often, but it's one of those things is that I was more than happy to host something from a personal experience in relation to mental health, because I think it's really important.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emily. So I guess kind of what I'm hoping to do is just for the next kind of 15-20 minutes take you on a bit of a journey through the last couple of decades, kind of more recently to kind of my sort of turning point, what I felt, how I felt going through that, and kind of what I used and kind of rely on today as kind of coping mechanisms. But I certainly feel that it's kind of made me stronger. Have a lot of admiration for people who are able to kind of share their views on this. And one of my slides is very much talking out to kind of one of those people who have kind of inspired me a little bit to kind of put this together and share this with you. So Emily, thank you, and to the IRMS, thank you for the platform. I normally judge a talk on myself as nobody falls asleep and nobody throws anything at me. So double benefit having a webinar such as this, that I can't see you. And you can't throw anything at me. So I'm going to get through this one slide at a time. So if I look at kind of where I was in kind of early 2000, sort of, I guess, starting out with, at the time, one of the leading records and information management companies, really whet my appetite for kind of this whole information management thing, looking at safeguarding the privacy, availability, integrity of data, making sure that it remained confidential. And it really started to sort of experience the grassroots of industry and really working alongside some absolute experts in their field to really see how individuals and organizations manage their information. Back then, it was very much in the records management space, and by term as such, it was very much suited to physical records. Back then, for me, certainly mental health or even well-being wasn't even a concept. I guess at the time, a little like cloud computing was, and kind of things that were that way off in the distance, people weren't even thinking about it. Or if they were, it certainly wasn't as mainstream as it was today. As I said, working with some of the kind of greatest minds in that field, it was sort of where I really got to see firsthand some experiences with kind of negative mental health. And I guess individuals across those different sectors, across those different teams, that were really starting to sort of show adverse symptoms of kind of really struggling with mental health. And I didn't really know what it was at the time. I just kind of saw it. It shocked me to start with, but kind of working with these individuals who are very experts in their field, very seasoned individuals going through their kind of role, and actually what I saw was a lot of angst, a lot of hatred towards their organizations, a lot of personal frustration and forbearing on themselves personally, that things weren't happening as they should, that they were having to spend extra time over and above their contracted hours to kind of make things right, to put things right, either to save the organization from the auditors or to sort of minimize the risk of things going wrong. And it was really kind of visible that kind of that the profession then was kind of causing these individuals a lot of emotional hardship, very much straining on the relationships at work and at home, and causing them to kind of take time out due to sort of management of stress. And pretty much what that meant was that kind of organizations that they worked for perhaps, well, didn't realize or kind of look for the hallmarks around mental health and well-being, but also themselves as individuals, they were taking a lot on personally and were getting very distraught and frustrated when things weren't working out the way they wanted them to. And as I said, for me, just coming into the field to kind of sort of be seen against this, it really shook me to see how I guess a business would be seen to dismiss the ideas or initiatives or recommendations of these experts, and just kind of put down the fact that it wasn't important or not a priority for them, but actually it was such a priority for these individuals. And I guess with no support at that time, you kind of really just sort of were riding on that personal pride and a personal position. But actually looking back now, it was really, for me, kind of the first hallmarks of kind of sort of mental health in our profession. That didn't realize it, but applying what kind of good data management, good information management practices are, and certainly something in my current role as a chief security officer, realized that kind of information management, like information security, is kind of not the only seat at the table. And that was something I didn't realize then, and talk through some of my shared frustrations. Whilst we all feel we should be doing things in the right and proper way, that actually organizations just aren't running that way. They're not run as much as they would like to attest to, that data, information management, records management principles should be at the core. There are 1,000,001 other things and other drivers businesses need to be mindful of just to stay afloat and to stay operating. So the first realization there has only really come to me in the last few years, but actually looking back now, it was really evident that people really strive to go forward. That for me was really the first time. Didn't experience it myself, but was certainly seeing it in industry. And as the story goes, start to see more of it come home. We then fast forward to kind of concepts of the digital office, kind of coined by Bill Gates back in '99. And I think it's still miles away here in 2020. Certainly sitting here in a law firm, paper is very much king. And unfortunately, the laws of this land and others still rely very much heavily on paper processes. But that was really kind of the start. As the kind of drive towards digital workplaces and digital data, e-discovery and the like, really kind of saw a separation in my working practices, because I found kind of two schools of thought in the workplace, and certainly through 2014, 2015, this is for me where it kind of really started to challenge, because I found myself trying to almost be schizophrenic in a way that would speak to and work with archivists, record managers, data managers, privacy professionals, but then also on the flip side would find myself working with IT professionals. So everyone across our kind of great sectors and our sort of practical world, I found myself struggling to compartmentalize, to bridge that gap. And I also think at my time, the organizations I was working with were also struggling with the same. And actually, I think even now I still see, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but there is very much an organizational divide between what I call the purists of records and information management, and then those more technically astute or those more kind of technically focused around data architecture and data management. And for me, I think the pressures of having to sort of manage those two kind of different types of specialisms within one organization, this kind of revolution of transition from paper to electronic, had some unknown sort of personal effects on me that I'd not really kind of grappled with, because as I was working with kind of dealing with those individuals and within those organizations, I found myself taking a lot more personal accountability and personal responsibility to what we were trying to achieve. And I talk about my sort of personal turning point and reflecting back to how I saw things when I first came in to the sector, into the industry. It really kind of shocked me, but I kind of didn't know any way out of that. It was kind of, for me, that was my new normal. So the kind of the personal weight or the personal kind of responsibility that I then carried with me meant it was consuming me on all levels. And kind of what I mean by that was that on the surface, it felt like, one regard, I was thriving because I was enjoying information management, information security, and all this kind of great stuff. But actually, underneath, it was consuming me from within, and I wasn't seeing my family. I was working long hours. I was feeling pretty exhausted when my downtime I had. At the time, I was working away 5-6 days a week, away from home, away from my family, away from my support network, and kind of very much thrown into full-time work. I'd head home pretty much to pick up and kind of clean my wardrobe, maybe get some sleep if I could, but when I did, I was pretty much exhausted. And that continued for well over kind of 18 months, almost 2 years. And it got to a point where something needed to give. It was either going to be me or the job. And thankfully I chose me. And that for me was very much my kind of turning point to kind of for this. It was realizing that actually I couldn't continue whilst an industry I loved so much and do continue to do so. I found I was giving myself too much to the cause and then work out kind of what I needed to do for it. So I found it very difficult navigating some of the perhaps more simplest of problems, the characters, the personalities through that pace. My workload extrapolated to cover those 5 or 6 days. 14, 15-hour days were the norm, and wondered why things weren't still getting done. I found myself working through the equation of more time should therefore equal more productivity, but it doesn't. And something needed to give. I was very fortunate that at that point I was able to take the opportunity with Pinsent, certainly a lot closer to home, and allowed me to reset. That reset wasn't easy, and I don't think I could have done it unless I'd made a list of what's important, a list of what my needs are, what my family's needs are, and what I want from my career and my life. And for me, that was the sort of starting point to help structure me being kind of a better me, and working out then where my priorities lie, what's important, and where I should spend my time and effort were absolutely key. And as I got stuck into sort of the next 12 months, my new challenge, fresh with the experiences I'd had before, and the help to guide me. I guess as we all do, we go through our lives and through our careers, we learn, we build, we kind of apply those learnings into the next phase or the next challenge. You do a piece of work or a project, it delivers, you conduct a lessons learned, and you kind of apply that afterwards and you go forward. We learn from our mistakes and incorporate those into our successes. Our moral compass, our belief system is kind of something that sits at the heart of everything we do, and certainly something for me. And for the first 12 months, things were working really well. And I was kind of finding myself more thinking about kind of what had happened and how I'd got myself into that sort of trap, and more about kind of finding myself in the present. And that's the thing with my mental health is very much it's not a sprint. It's been very much kind of not fixing it and thinking that's it, I've dealt with that, and moving on. Keeping the analogy, like any professional athlete, you want to make sure you maintain your fitness and kind of make regular checkups. So for me, I was running as I'd trained to do. I'd ran previously in a particular style. I applied myself again. And then in autumn 2018, I tripped massively and hit the floor. I was at the end of some unfortunate accusations, and they really kind of sort of, for me, threatened my career, threatened my employment, threatened my livelihood, and threatened everything I held dear in terms of my family, my reputation. And things went very dark. They went very dark for the rest of the year, and certainly into 2019. And it was hard with an industry I'd fallen in love with, and kind of knew no bounds. Everything was suddenly despised and hated. Didn't want to be here, didn't want to kind of carry on and go forward. Worse still, I was very much still angry at the personal attack, felt very wronged that these accusations were sort of made, and found myself very much questioning how I'd ever done things and done things and approached information security, information management. I'd built my strategies, my approach on almost kind of 2 decades of work in this field, and certainly looking to take the best things I can from the experts I've worked alongside, only to be really kind of thrown sideways now with questions over, well, how right is that? And was very much in part of that HR process designed to sort of, I guess, support all parties and to kind of get to the bottom of kind of what the concerns were. Whilst it was a fair process, there's nothing that prepares you for feeling like you're on trial, and that you're very much guilty until proven innocent. And it's absolutely heart-wrenching. A phrase I kept getting repeated to me was around that it's not personal, it's just business, it's the way things are. But for me, I really struggled to comprehend that at the start, because everything I've done has been around people. I talk around my security team being very much that, a team, and InfoSec being a team sport. So to have this belief system very much questioned really kind of went to the heart of everything that I stood for. So it really kind of knocked me sideways. And then I saw a return to some of my frustrations and my triggers, my sort of behaviors as I saw before. Lost all motivation, pretty much flat. So something I saw as a passion, and often quoted and famed for saying that kind of, I love it so much it doesn't feel like work. So I don't feel I've ever worked today, certainly in the last 20 years. But that went out the window, lost my drive, found it difficult to get focused, to get enthused about work where I previously had. It was personally affecting my physical state. I wasn't sleeping, wasn't able to concentrate, started to get kind of stress-related headaches. It wasn't brilliant. I couldn't see a way out. Something I'd practiced and worked on for such a long time, all of a sudden was thrown into disarray. I felt so aggrieved at the situation as well. A big part of that was me being driven by my anger. I contemplated leaving, taking leave, all of which didn't set well with me and resulted in me just plodding on. And I just found myself in this kind of this state that kind of somewhere between sleep and awake, where I was able to put one step in front of another and actually go forward. Sometimes those steps weren't far at all. Sometimes they were a bit bigger than others. But for me, it was forward, and for that was a way I kind of dealt with all of this going through. But then realised that wasn't something I could continue. My world was upside down, and something again needed to change. And for me, that change came in speaking out. I spoke to my boss, I spoke to my support network, and I told them I needed help. I couldn't continue. This didn't happen overnight. This took me about 12 months to realise I needed some help and some assistance here. Not that I was fearful of doing so, but just I didn't even know it was an option. If I didn't do something to change that, my fear was that I'd carry on like this. And as the famed insanity quote goes, for doing stuff over and over again can be quite painful. So I was very thankful for doing that, and it really helped and make available resources that will really help me to kind of get me steady again. And firstly, for kind of something that really challenged me fundamentally in life, I can't recommend enough than speaking to a specialist. People are trained and experienced in kind of unpicking your brain and unpicking your thought processes and then putting you back together again. My wiring had come loose, as I described it, and I needed somebody to come and reset it. I needed some coping mechanisms to help me get through this, because this wasn't normal. I'd not experienced this before. I'd not developed the experiences or coping structure needed through my career, and it was new. The pressures put on me and the expectations put on critical roles, on managing the lifeblood of an organisation, the data, the information that flows around. Now, in my capacity as safeguarding that as a security officer, the role itself and the industry itself is very much kind of measured on failure. You hear about all the data breaches that occur and all the bad things that happen, but you never hear about the good stuff. So I really needed to kind of focus on what was important and look at getting me back on track. And for the first time, the ripe old age of 28, I spoke to my therapist, and it had a huge weight that lifted over me. Marcia was able to deconstruct my thoughts, my views, my feelings, and help me put them in a way that really kind of made sense and understood. So coming back to the sort of saying that kind of kept getting repeated to me around, it's just business, it's not personal, it really rung true. And it was hugely beneficial and hugely insightful, actually, to kind of see the world through somebody else's eyes. And I'm sure other people kind of will have different feelings, but for me, it was very much an outer body experience. To see that how I was acting and behaving, to actually then see independently and constructively how I could change and cope and deal with things better. And it really gave me the strength to go through what the following months laid ahead in terms of the sort of HR process. And I kind of now sitting on the view that everyone through their lives will need to speak to somebody at some point. And that's certainly one of my recommendations, whether that's in a professional capacity or a personal capacity. And one of the biggest things I could have done is around talking about it, and sort of, for me, really calling that out and being able to sort of rely on that sort of expertise. For me, it's not just about kind of bringing the industry best together to do what we need to do as part of my day job. But actually, I've started to see it now as bringing the best things together for me to make me the better me. When this all started out, it was certainly very slow, very rewarding, cried a lot, but I was able to get through to the real rub of the matter. We went from weekly sessions to help me kind of deal with things in the short term. And now we're speaking every 3 months. And that's not to be as a case of dealing with the issues I had, but actually as a check-in and to help maintain my mental fitness. The personalities and characters we deal with on a daily basis will all play a part in our lives, in our business, in our jobs, in our roles, etc. And whether we like it or not, things are never just business without the elements of personality. But the key thing to really take away, and something I took away from this, was that we're all here for the same reasons. We're here for the safeguarding of data and the integrity or confidentiality of those. And it will involve working with people, and we can't get away from that. But actually, to know that the issues or matters aren't personal, it is very much dealing with things on a business footing. So as I draw to a close, I wanted to sort of share with you a couple of key points or summaries. Firstly, drowning, not waving. This was the name of a blog by a colleague of mine called Tom Langford that I would ask you and urge you to go out and Google and go and find and have a read. He wrote this in February 2019, and I've been working alongside with Tom in various kind of capacities for a number of years now, and it absolutely floored me. His blog was so personal and moving about his own personal mental health experiences, and it's one of the things that's motivated me to talk to you about it today, but also really goes to show, and certainly did for me, the fact that on the surface things may seem all swimmingly and great, but actually you never know. People are dealing with their own battles every day, and you just don't know what's going on behind the surface. Connect, join, ask, reach out, speak to people, whether that's people you know or people you don't know. Over the last few months, I've got some real pleasure and benefit from the social media platform Twitter. It's instant, it's fantastic, and you can talk to people the other side of the world that you don't even know about things that can be massively personal or completely unrelated. But I would certainly urge you, don't sort of deal with this alone. What might feel like a minor thing, it is not. And there are people out there that will be willing to talk to you. My details are on the slide. I'll talk. Look at the physical as well as the mental. Stay active. Look at your physical health. Healthy body, healthy mind, as the saying goes. Something to bear in mind. If you're looking for distractions or coping mechanisms to sort of see you through, look at learning. Look at learning new skills, new experiences. Put yourself in a position where you're open to learn new things. As the saying goes, again, every day is a school day, and for me it certainly is. Random acts of kindness. One of the things I took away from one of the charities we do work with, Mind. Random acts of kindness have been shown to increase persons' well-being and kind of improve their mental state. So where you can, it's obviously a little difficult at the moment, but please encourage those random acts. And finally, awareness, both self-awareness and awareness of where you are now, here in the present. Whilst things may have happened previously and things may happen in the future, the focus is very much now, and look at the awareness of you now. And then one of the other things that I've been recently made aware of would be something to not only help you, but in your organisations as well, is the Mindful Business Charter, something that has been launched with a number of banks, and legal firms over the last couple of years. And there's some great toolkits and assets that are free to use with this charter that allow you to help safeguard not only your mental health and well-being, but those of others. So it gives you some really good practical tips of how you can take those back to the workplace. And finally, thank you. Thank you for not falling asleep. Thank you for not throwing anything. And there's my contact details below if anyone wants to discuss further or have a chat after this presentation. So Emily, thank you again for the platform. Sorry, I've run over a little bit on time.
No problem.
As I said, my story wasn't overly rehearsed prior to starting.
And to be honest, sometimes that's the best kind of story because you haven't prepared it as a script. So in that, you kind of get the raw, honest truth from this kind of thing. Emily Gresham has put in the comments the link to Tom Langford's Drowning Not Waving post.
Awesome. Thanks.
And lots of people are saying thank you. I don't know if you can see them, Christian.
Yeah, no, okay. I've got the chat here.
If anyone's got any questions to ask Christian, then do so in the chat box. I guess it's kind of, I find this topic a really important topic as it kind of hits home really personally for me. A lot of people don't realize, because I usually wear bracelets covering it because I don't like to show tattoos and stuff, but on my wrist, I don't know if you can see it.
Microsoft's blurring it out because it thinks it's part of the background.
Yeah, it's basically just there is a semicolon, and it's to do with the Semicolon Project, which is about, it's a brief pause, not the end of your sentence. And I've actually, because I don't speak about it that much and because it can be quite personal, having that tattoo, when my bracelet moves and people see it, I've actually been approached by a couple of people to say, you know about mental health. You want to, you're happy to talk about it. And I've had people, like complete strangers, divulge moments to me, which I've gone, wow. And one of the quotes that actually hit me, it's a long time ago now, but people say to me that actually I'm like the happiest person ever. How on earth could I be depressed? How could anything be wrong with me? And there's a quote by Robin Williams that basically says, I think the saddest people always try their hardest to make people happy because they know what it's like to feel absolutely worthless and they don't want anyone else to feel like that. And I just think it's just so key to think about, like as you said, Christian, think about what's happening under the surface layer, because the surface, it might be lots of things going swimmingly, everything's fine, but actually just take a pause and ask someone, how are you? Can make the difference in somebody's day completely. We've got lots of thank you sharings and stuff like that. But if no one's got any questions, I just want to say thank you very much, Christian, for sharing your story and coming along. I might give you a contact just to look at a blog post at some point, or something to look at for the bulletin, IRMS bulletin. Yeah, sure. Because obviously we've only got this crowd, but I feel this topic needs to be looked at, and the IRMS chair, Scott, is a advocate of this topic as well.
Our second speaker is Graham Snow with Meditation versus Management.
So next up, we have Christian. If you want to, you can turn your camera off, or you can stay smiling at us. We do not mind. But next up, we have Graham Snow. And for the minute, my brain has gone blank, and I can't remember the topic of what he's going to be talking about. So I hope he's going to repeat it, because it's literally just dropped out my head. So take it away, Graham.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to put some slides up in a minute, but I just wanted to show my face first, because this is all about people, not about PowerPoint slides. Again, this might not be obvious from my slides, because I sort of pride myself on my PowerPoint presentations, but this was also thrown together very much at the last minute, so do bear with me as I run through this. So the topic for today that I've sort of discussed with Emily is meditation versus management. So accepting imperfection in the workplace. But I'm going to take you through a very personal story as well. So there's a little bit of psychology and a bit of research thrown in there, but it is also very much a personal story. So hopefully you'll afford me the same kindnesses that were offered to Christian. So let me just pop those slides up on the screen. Hopefully this is going to work.
I'm appreciating the fact that you're in China, Graham. It's cool.
Are you seeing my PowerPoint slides now?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Lovely.
And I'll
Thank
turn
you very
myself on
much.
mute now.
So this is me a good few years ago, sort of 2012, 2013-ish, and never actually talked about it really before outside of a work context, but I had a major burnout around about 2013. So I've always been a bit of a sort of do or die, all or nothing kind of person. I like to be really busy and I tend to take on too much. So around about 2013, I had a major sort of burnout at work. And I'm just going to take you through sort of what a burnout is, because I think it's quite key, particularly in our role. I think we face a lot of pressures that are particular to being information management professionals that other people don't necessarily experience, or other roles don't necessarily experience. So there are sort of 6 key risk factors identified that lead to burnout. So what they talk about is a mismatch in control. So if your role doesn't necessarily have a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility, it doesn't tend to matter if you have too much control. But obviously in our roles, we're trying to quite often change behavior, change policy and process across a whole organization. So control is quite a critical factor. Mismatch in workload. So if you're under a huge amount of pressure, if you've got a lot to do, back in the early days of my career, I was working 12-hour days every day in the commercial sector. So facing a lot of pressure there. Perceived lack of fairness, and this was a really interesting factor that contributed to the burnout that I had, was that I was working very long days, facing a lot of pressure, but surrounded by people who weren't necessarily under the same pressure. So there was a real perceived lack of fairness involved. Lack of recognition, lack of award. So just generally not feeling appreciated. Loss of positive connections, so breakdown in relationships with people around you. And then conflict in values, and I think this one is particularly key to information management professionals, because what we do is very value driven. So there's a fundamental belief in the rights to privacy and the need to protect information. And very much what we do is about doing the right thing a lot of the time, whereas often we're sort of coming up against people who either don't perceive what we do as being important, or don't necessarily place the same importance on it that we do. So I don't necessarily have the same values that we do. So when these factors come together, one or more of these factors come together, what we get is periods of prolonged stress, and that can eventually lead to the kind of burnout that I experienced, which includes things like a loss of motivation, loss of identity, something I really struggled with at the time, because I'd for so long been working in a certain way and trying to do the right thing and taking on too much. When I then went through this burnout, I then questioned everything about the way I was working and what I was doing, which led to then questions about who I was as a person. Feelings of helplessness, just feeling completely overwhelmed and out of control. Frustration and anger. I certainly suffered with a real sense of rage inside when I went through this burnout, because of just not knowing what to do and not feeling that anyone else was supporting me in the way that I wanted to be supported. And then thankfully something I didn't struggle with, but something I know a lot of people do, which is trouble sleeping. So happily, I'm long past this now. This was many, many years ago, although I haven't really talked about it in a long time. But I would strongly agree with what Christian said earlier, which is that talking to people is really key. So I probably went 12 months through this burnout before I really began to talk to people about what was going on. So what most people said around me is that I'd just become very grumpy for a long time, just very moody, very grumpy, really fed up with everything. And it was when I began to talk about what I was feeling that I was able to move forward with this. I did briefly speak to a counsellor as well. I had about 6 sessions of counselling. And again, I'd reiterate that speaking to someone in a professional capacity is really helpful. So speaking to friends is great. But what I found with talking to friends is I felt like I was just ranting a lot, whereas talking to someone who's completely independent, completely separate from your situation, and then can ask really objective questions, really helped me to focus my mind on how to move past this. So I just want to talk very quickly about some of the factors that I think actually specifically influenced the burnout that I experienced. Because one of the things I just mentioned is that I was doing 12-hour days. Well, actually, that came to an end. So because of the amount of pressure I was under, I left the commercial sector and I moved into higher education. So what I tried to do was find a better work-life balance by working in a different sector, thinking that that would kind of sort out a lot of my kind of stress and feelings that I was having at the time. But it was actually working in the higher education sector that I experienced this burnout, which the reality was I was probably working 9 to 5, so much reduced hours, theoretically much stress, but it was the culture of the environment clashing with who I was as a person. So just want to mention this briefly. Spheres of influence I find really interesting. You can actually map out the people around you or the people you work with in terms of how much influence or control you have over those people. And I think this is a really challenging situation for us as information management professionals, because as I've already mentioned, what we're trying to do all the time is quite often change a whole organization, so change the behavior of hundreds if not thousands of people, and get senior managers to effectively put money to something that they don't necessarily understand. So given that you can map out how much control you've got over the people around you, I think it's actually really important to realize that sometimes not having influence, not having control directly over people is a contributing factor to a huge amount of stress. So if we map this against, say, the amount of authority that someone has in an organization, typically as information management professionals, we're fairly low down. We're not, unless you're a data protection officer reporting in directly to the board, and I'm not saying that the job of a DPO is easy, but there certainly tend to be sort of have a more direct line in than someone like a records manager, as I've been a couple of times in the past. But the people who can really make the decisions tend to be the exec, or at least sort of the upper end of middle management. Whereas actually, if you don't have direct control over those people, when we talk about direct control, it might be if you're a manager, you have direct control over those staff. You can instruct them to do something. You also hopefully have direct control over yourself and kind of immediate people around you. At the upper end, you might have some influence. So if you've got a really good trust relationship built up with a member of your senior executive, they might listen to you, but you can't tell them what to do. So at best, you've got influence over them if they listen to your advice. But the reality is, for most of the exec, you probably have no influence at all. And this was a source of a lot of problems for me, because I was trying to convince an organization to change when actually I had no power to either control or influence the only people who had the authority to make the change. So that's a realization that's come to me later in my career. At the time, what I was often doing was talking to middle management, but middle management didn't have the power to make a decision. What I now often do is seek out influencers. So if I need a decision made at the executive level, I'll seek out somebody that I know has influence or control at that level, so that if I can win them over, then I know that I've got an ally who can help to win over somebody at the exec level. Another thing I just want to talk about is change management. So one of the things that we have to do a lot as information management professionals is try and get people to change behavior. And it's something that we do quite a lot in the sense of trying to get other people to believe in our cause, because it is a bit of a cause sometimes, records management and data protection. It's we're trying to do the right thing. And we often find that people have got other priorities. They've got a lot of other work on. And it's quite hard, because what we're trying to say to them is, I want you to take on some additional responsibility. You who is a social care worker, or you who work in IT, I want you to do some extra work to solve my problem, which is a really, really difficult sell to make. And we often do this without any training. So I don't know how many of you have actually gone on change management courses or studied psychology to look at change management. But in my sort of experience of talking to a lot of people, not many people do. I tend to find more people who work in IT departments who have experience in change management than who work in information governance, risk assurance, etc.
We had a webinars on Wednesday a few weeks ago with Dara O'Brien talking about change management in data management and looking at the psychology of change. I am looking at getting an audio out on it soon.
Fantastic, because I actually missed that. I was really disappointed that I couldn't get to it. So I'd love to see a recording of that, or any notes you could send out. But I think learning a bit about change management and psychology is something that would actually help us, because this is another factor that contributed is this endless task of trying to convince people to do the right thing when they don't want to and they haven't got the time. And that was another factor that really contributed to me just thinking, well, why am I bothering with this? Why am I killing myself trying to fix this organization that doesn't want to be fixed? But I've been through a big journey in the last 3, 4, maybe 5 years of learning a lot more about change management. Nudge theory, I would strongly encourage anyone to look up nudge theory. It's been a real revelation for me in terms of the way I work. Not just directly in change management, but it's also really helped me in terms of how I present information, how I approach people, thinking about things from their perspective. What I'm showing you on screen is a project at the University of Hertfordshire in which we use nudge theory to change behaviour. So for many, many years, we had a real problem with noise on the top floor of our library. And what we'd do is we'd send security staff round, and we'd send poor members of staff round to shout at people effectively to tell them to be quiet. And they'd go around with a clipboard and they'd tell people off. And then as soon as they'd walk away again, the noise would just increase. And it just seemed like an impossible task that we were never going to get people's behaviour to change. And then luckily we had a guy come in called Pete, who had a background in nudge theory and came in as a business analyst. And he said, let's change our approach. Something I do now a lot is I will constantly change my tactics. Rather than doing the same thing over and over again, I'll try different approaches. But Pete said, let's change our approach. Let's employ nudge theory. So he went away with a couple of other people, did a bit of research, and the conclusion they came to was that they needed to change the furniture. Really strange conclusion when you first think about it. So on the left in that picture is what we used to have on the top floor. In fact, on every floor. Was group tables. The furniture actively encouraged people to be noisy. And then what they did was they moved the bookshelves around and they put in what we have on the right, which is what I now tend to call antisocial furniture. The furniture is deliberately designed and oriented to stop people talking. So rather than telling people to change their behaviour, what we actually did was we changed the environment. So we changed the things around people so that their behaviour more naturally changed. Now, I don't want to labour this too much because this is not so much about mental health, but I find it such an interesting, useful tool, particularly for all of us who are constantly struggling with this battle of trying to get people to change. So a quick few thoughts on nudge theory. I always love to show this picture when I'm talking about nudge theory, and that this for me always hammers home the point. So in that picture in the bottom right, which do you think is a bigger influencer on people's behaviour? The sign at the top that says no ball games, or the spray painted goalposts strongly encouraging kids to kick a football against the wall? And this for me is a quintessential example of how nudge theory works. So what we tend to do normally is education and enforcement. So we send out emails telling people what to do, and we shout at them with a megaphone, and we have broadcasts over the tannoy system, and we write policies. So we either try to educate people or enforce it. So we could put a bigger sign on there, huge sign saying no ball games, or we could send someone around every hour with a clipboard telling people to stop playing football. What nudge theory says is change the environment. So rather than put a bigger sign up, remove the goalposts. Let's spray it over. Let's get rid of let's wipe those lines off. Even better, what if we can paint that wall? Let's paint it with flowers. Let's paint it with something else. What about if we put some benches in, so we make it more comfortable for people to sit and harder to play football? So that's the nudge theory approach. What we do is we make indirect and subtle changes to the environment, and then people's behavior will naturally, unconsciously change rather than trying to tell them what to do. If you don't believe me, have a think about how many times in an airport or a post office you followed a line or walked to the end of the line and stopped. So we are trained to behave in certain unconscious ways that we don't even realize we're doing. So back to mental health for a minute. Emily approached me because I do quite a lot with meditation. So I've been practicing meditation now for quite a long time. I've sort of lost count. I was trying to work it out before the start of this, but it's sort of somewhere between 10 to 20 years I've been doing it, but more so in recent years.
Just a short amount of time, Graham.
Just a short amount. I'm no expert. I'm not claiming to be an expert. I just mean it's been part of my life for quite a while. And one of the sort of guys, one of the few people who taught me meditation, a guy called Tom, always talks about the fact that in our lives, a problem has two sides. So there's the practical side. There's that email you received. There's your boss being difficult. There's the huge amount of records you need to get sorted. And then there's the mental side. So there's always two aspects to every problem that we deal with. Obviously, we've got to sort the practical side. If we're in debt, we've got to try and pay it off. If we've got a load of paper boxes that need sorting out, we've got to go do it. But the thing that we often neglect is the mental side, and the way we respond to things. So if you think about the last argument you had or the last email you received that upset you, that argument probably lasted for a few minutes. You know, the email probably took 30 seconds to read, a couple of minutes to read, whatever it may be. But the stress and anxiety you feel about that probably goes on for hours, if not days. I mean, if you think about a meeting that you attended where it was particularly uncomfortable, the meeting might have been 30 minutes to an hour, but that meeting probably replayed in your mind over and over again afterwards. And we do this particularly with arguments. So if you have an argument with someone, you tend to replay that argument. You might even continue the argument in your head doing their side of it. So you do what you think they'd respond with, and then you respond in your head with what you want to say, and you carry on that argument afterwards. The problem with this is that you carry it with you. So the problem that happened only once for a short period of time, you carry for a much longer period of time in your head. You sort of almost do more damage to yourself than the initial incident. So if somebody kind of shouts at you once, you carry on shouting at yourself on their behalf in your head. It's a really strange thing that we all do. The reality is that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as information management professionals to solve practical problems. You know, and it's a problem that other people don't necessarily understand. But sometimes it's not other people and the problem itself that we need to deal with. It's the way that we respond to it. Now, a really funny thing about meditation is after a while you learn that emotions and responses to things are very conditioned behaviors. So actually, it's perfectly possible to be sort of very calm, very neutral, or even happy about bad news, because the way you react to something is very different from the situation itself. There's a really great example of somebody stepping on your toe on the tube. So you're on the underground and someone stands on your toe and it really hurts. And obviously you're really angry and upset about that until you realize that the reason they stood on your toe is because somebody's just shoved them and they're really upset about it. Or, you know, perhaps they're feeling really unwell and they're not quite aware of what's happening. And then immediately your emotional reaction changes to exactly the same situation because we become aware of new information, but our emotional response isn't necessarily guaranteed. It doesn't have to be a particular response based on a situation. Now, I come from a long background of doing sort of meditation and Tai Chi. I'm a bit of a hippie Buddhist nerd, but actually, it's not just a sort of a religious practice. There's a lot of meditation being used now in the West and being very much psychology driven. So it doesn't have to be just this sort of new age hippie thing. It's a tool that we can all benefit from. So I just want to introduce a bit of psychology for a minute, just to back up some of the things I'm saying about meditation being helpful. In 2014, Johns Hopkins University reviewed 19,000 studies of meditation And what they were looking for was really rigorous studies, so ones that they felt that they could really rely on the results. So they selected only 47 of those. But from those 47 cases, 47 clinical trials that they found, they found strong evidence that meditation can help to ease stress, anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. Harvard University has a mindfulness research center, and in 2012, they did a clinical trial where they taught meditation to a group of people and then put them in an MRI scanner. And what they found is that there were changes in brain activity from those people while they were meditating, but they also found that the changes in brain activity continued afterwards. So they had a control group who they saw no change in brain activity, but this group of people who'd been doing meditation for only 2 months, even when they were not meditating, they continued to have brain activity within a particular area of the brain called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is responsible for memory, decision making, and emotional response. So what they were seeing was there a much greater level of brain activity, indicating that people had a much greater control over their decision making and their emotions. But what was also really interesting about that was after only 2 months, the control group who had been taught meditation actually reported lower negative feelings about themselves and a quicker ability to disengage from negative thoughts. So they were able to stop their own negative thoughts. So it seems that there is a scientific basis behind meditation. It's not just a sort of an odd practice. And that's why I do a lot now, particularly at the university where I work currently. I run regular meditation sessions. Anyone can drop in. We just focus on the activity of doing meditation. We don't bring any other kind of cultural or spiritual background in. And I get a lot of really positive feedback from people that they're finding that it's really helpful to them. No, I just wanted to sort of stress this point that meditation has very much arrived in the West as a science. So you see it all over the place now. It's in the news all the time. You see magazine articles about it. So despite being a sort of practice that's been going on for 500 to 600 years, since 500-600 years BCE, it sort of very much seems to have arrived here in the last 5 or 10 years. And you're going to see it a lot, particularly the NHS these days are talking about mindfulness, which is really interesting. It's sort of the way the Western world has adapted their perspective on meditation. So if anyone who's been unfortunately dragged to one of these terrible sessions, I'm not a fan at all of practicing mindfulness by eating a raisin. It always sort of tickles me a little bit. And it also worries me a little bit because I think it's going to put some people off what actually can be a really useful skill. Mindfulness is just about learning to be in the present moment and be aware of what's happening, because very often we tend to be either worrying about the past, so we're replaying things that have already happened, or we're worrying about the future rather than just sort of being very much in the here and now and thinking about what we're doing, being in the moment. That's all mindfulness is. It's just being aware of what you're currently doing. And meditation is just to focus on something. So often when we think about meditation, we think about it as being sort of people clearing their minds. The reality is it doesn't work that way. You can't clear your mind. Your mind is very active. It's always doing something. So what we learn to do in meditation is to focus. We pick something and we focus on it, and that's how we learn to calm ourselves. So the sort of most frequently taught meditation exercise is one called Mindfulness of Breathing, which is just focusing on your breath, and it's as simple as that. But that's what we've been doing at our meditation sessions at the University of Hertfordshire throughout the coronavirus epidemic. We've been running them as sessions on Teams or on Zoom. That's getting really high response. We're getting sort of 20-25 people at every session and getting some really positive feedback about it. So I've kind of jumped between two very strange topics there, and that's somewhat a reflection of the fact that I threw this together. But I wanted to sort of bring in some strategies that you can think about in terms of how you're thinking about your day-to-day work, so the management side, your approach to things like change management and decision making within your organization, which is about solving the practical side. But I also wanted to bring in something that for me has been a really positive strategy. I think was the phrase that Christian used earlier, coping strategy. Meditation has been a really positive coping strategy for dealing with stress and just sort of learning to let go, learning to kind of accept that we're not always going to be able to solve all the problems. Sometimes we've got to just accept that we can only do the best that we can do. Now, what I talked about, yeah.
We have a question from
oh, yeah,
the chat.
I can't see questions on my screen, so I'm just going to pop that back up.
It's all right, I can read it to you.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Do you focus on an issue that is causing you stress or something particularly random? I design houses in my mind to de-stress and help me sleep.
Oh, you know, I've never heard of that before. That's really interesting. That's a slightly longer answer. Generally speaking, what I do is regular practice of mindfulness of breathing and a couple of other kinds of meditation. But if I am dealing with something that's causing me stress in particular, a particular worry, what I do is another kind of meditation, which is not so much a sort of Western psychology thing. It's more of a kind of Buddhist activity. But that's my own personal practice. What I find about meditation is that there's so many different kinds. There's all different kinds of meditation coming from different cultural backgrounds. There's a lot of different kinds of meditation we're seeing now in Western practice. The most important thing is to find what works for you. So this is what I talk to people all about a lot. Even when I teach mindfulness of breathing, I talk about people trying different things of having their eyes open or closed, trying it lying down or sitting. And what's important is to just keep trying something until you find what actually helps you. So if you take, for example, mindfulness of breathing, there's a big difference between whether you do it in the morning, whether you do it just before you go to bed, or whether you do it just when you finish work. So myself and my fiance got into a regular routine of doing meditation as a kind of end to the day. So when she would come home from work, we'd sit down and do 10 minutes. And that was a very nice way to then start the evening. So we could kind of put all of the working day behind us and carry on. But for those people who have trouble sleeping at night, doing meditation just before you sleep is a really good way to let go of the anxiety from the day. Walking meditation is something that I found particularly helpful when I'm having particular periods of stress or anxiety, because it's really hard sometimes to just sit down in a chair and just try and let go. So actually doing something more active, like Tai Chi, like yoga, like a kind of walking meditation where you just pay attention to your breathing or pay attention to your footsteps while moving, is a really good way to kind of let go of some of that stress and anxiety, because just sitting down, it can be sometimes hard if you're already feeling quite tense in your body to just relax. So I haven't come across that before about designing houses in mind. That's really interesting. I'm going to go away and do a bit of Googling about that and see
I
what
think
I
I'd
can
be
find.
frustrated about what colour should the walls be. I'd just be like, I can't choose. But one of the things that I do when I'm going to sleep, if I'm quite known to be an insomniac really, is that sometimes I just cannot sleep. And it's something that I learned at the IRMS conference, because we had a charity come to help us then and do the fringe, was that learning about, it's like the mindfulness breathing. It's like breathe in for 4, hold for 2, and let out for 5. The out has to always be longer than the in, however many seconds that you do it for. And if you repeat that 7 times, I've never got to 7. I've always fallen asleep before I've got there.
That's really interesting, because the kind of meditation I teach, we focus very much on not trying to control the breath, just being aware of it. But this is kind of the point. There are different strategies. So if you do give it a go and find that it doesn't work for you, it might be worth just trying something else, because there's lots of different approaches out there. I'm just going to show my details, because I know this is being recorded. So then my contact details are on here, if I can get that up. There we go. So those are my contact details. If anyone wants to reach out to me and ask any questions, you're very welcome to do so. That's my Twitter, that's my email address. So I'll leave that up for a second.
Graham, just so you know, I've asked people in the chat whether this is something that they'd be interested in the IRMS offering, and just to let me know, and I've already had 3 people say yes.
Oh, right, okay, interesting. So Emily and myself were discussing whether to actually do a little meditation session at the end of this. We knew that it wouldn't be for everyone, but we wanted to offer it. So assuming that you still want to do that, Emily, we could lead into a short meditation session now. If anyone doesn't want to particularly join in, they're obviously welcome to head off at this point. But if
I'm likely to turn my camera off so that I can join in, because I feel very much on stage right now. But it is something that I'm interested in, and I totally understand if people go, no, not for me, or even just to listen into what it's doing. You don't even have to partake yourself, just listen to see what it's about. There's no force here to ask anyone to do it. And if you do drop off, no judgment is actually given. Just, you know, feel free to do whatever you want to do. But I just thought it would be interesting, you know, just to experience it whilst Graham's available. If you could let me know in the chat your thoughts on this, this would be great.
Okay.
You just give people a few seconds on the chat.
If not, Emily, we can disappear into another meeting and do
that. Just me and you together, it'd be fine.
Okay, we've got at least 1 taker. Oh, 2? Okay, lovely. Fantastic.
A really positive response. It's great.
Okay, lovely. We'll give it a go then. Right, so I'm going to just take you through a few things to be aware of. Obviously, the particular kind of meditation I'm going to talk you through is mindfulness of breathing, which comes from a Buddhist background, which doesn't particularly matter. It's just a practical exercise we're going to do. But if you wanted to know more about it, that would be the place to go to find out. As Emily's mentioned, there are other kinds of meditation as well, but we're going to take you through this one. So what we'll do is we'll mute everyone in a minute so we're not disturbing each other. I will leave my video on, but everyone else is very welcome to turn them off. So what we need to know first is that we want to be sat upright. So we're going to put our, assuming you can, because I'm not sure where you're all sat, we're going to put our feet flat on the floor. We're going to sit upright in the chair. Now, this is helpful because we want to sort of be alert and awake as we're doing this. If you do meditation while lying down or sort of very relaxed in a bean bag or a comfy chair, then you're much more likely to nod off. We tend to say when we meditate, there tend to be either sleepers and worriers. So if you're a sleeper, you do want to be very upright and awake as you do this. So we're going to put our feet flat on the floor. We're going to sit nice and upright in the chair. If you can, don't lean on the back of the chair because it helps you to kind of stay upright. If you're leaning against the chair, it's easier to fall asleep. Now, I would say if you've got any back issues at all, like I do feel free to lean on the back of the chair. It's a good, helpful support. But otherwise, if you can be upright, that's great. Hands resting naturally in your lap. There's no particular position you have to do, just whatever feels comfortable. And then when we do this, you can have your eyes open or eyes closed. In the Buddhist tradition, we have sort of half open. What you'll tend to find is with your eyes closed, you're more likely to nod off. With your eyes open, you're more likely to be distracted. So it's good to try different things and find out which one works for you.
I'm just working out what I'm going to do, whether I'm going to fall asleep or not.
This is the moment where you find out. But we're just nice and relaxed. We're sat up and right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start to breathe. Now, the important thing is not to try and control your breathing. Just let it happen naturally and be aware of it. So I want you to try and notice the rhythm of your breathing. I want you to feel the sensation of breathing in and out. So traditionally, we sort of feel here on the lip or on the nose. So we're going to breathe in through the nose, breathe out through the nose. If you have to breathe through your mouth because you've got a blocked nose, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. But be aware of the sensation of the breath. Be aware of the rhythm of the breath. What you're probably going to find is that that's really subtle and it takes a bit of practice. So what's going to likely happen is you'll breathe in, breathe out, and then after about 10 seconds, you'll think, oh, I forgot to send that email to someone. Or you'll think, oh no, I've left the oven on. And something will happen in your brain, or you'll hear a noise outside, a car will go past and it'll distract you. It's perfectly natural. People who've been meditating for years still get distracted. There are 2 really important points. 1, don't beat yourself up about it. We all do this. You cannot clear your mind. It's impossible. But 2, don't get attached to the thought or the distraction. So as soon as you can, come back to being aware of your breathing. So kind of note to yourself that you've got distracted. Even if you got distracted for 8 minutes, it doesn't matter. Come back to your breathing again as soon as you can. It's about consistency, not quality. So the more you can keep doing this, the more you practice, the better it'll get. But it doesn't matter how bad it is, just keep doing it. So that's pretty much it. Oh, so the only other thing to add is that because it's so subtle, the breath, sometimes people find it really hard to be aware of it. So what you might want to do is count the breaths. And typically we count them on the out breath. So we breathe in, breathe out, and count 1. Breathe in.
I keep thinking,
breathe
am I
out,
breathing?
As you count the breaths, you'll probably get distracted. Probably by 3, it happens. Just come back to 1 again, start again. Don't beat yourself up about it. If you get to 10, just go back to 1. There's no winning. It's not whoever gets the highest number. You can do anything really. You can just think inhaling, exhaling. It doesn't matter. But as long as you sort of say something to yourself in your head, it helps you to keep you focused on your breath. And it's as simple as that. So we're going to do 10 minutes. Is that okay with everyone? 10's fine. It's quite a short period of time, but you'll find it'll really fly by. So what I'll do is I've got a little bell next to me. I'll ring the bell to start, and then I'll ring it 3 times when we're done. Just had another yes. I thought it might be a question. Are there any questions before we start? Anything else anyone wants to know?
It's interesting. We've only had 1 drop off, so everyone's really interested, which is great.
Or they're asleep, already asleep.
Or they've fallen asleep already, yeah.
Okay, so I will keep an eye on the chat in case anyone has any questions, and I'll ring the bell when we're done, but otherwise I'll stick my mic on mute. Okay, so just that awareness of the breath then for 10 minutes.
Take this 10-minute opportunity to engage in meditation yourself. Otherwise, fast forward to 1 hour, 21 minutes to see the end of the webinar. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, everyone. Just take a minute to sort of be aware of your surroundings again.
You want to write in the chat box when you're back.
Yeah, I completely agree with Bronwyn's comment there. It's been really nice actually to hear shared experience, because I don't think we often talk about mental health. We don't talk about our own experiences, so it's been really good to hear other people going through the same struggles.
Someone said to me not so long back, which really helped, was that with a physical illness, you wouldn't leave that left alone. So why would you leave your mental health alone?
Mm.
Well, if anyone has any questions about meditation or anything, they're very welcome to contact me on my my email address or Twitter, or I'm happy to hang around for a bit if there's any questions. But otherwise, thank you very much for having me, Emily. And
Thank you very much for coming.
really nice to talk to you all.
Same goes for me, is that I will be online as ever, RM Girl UK on Twitter, or depending on how you want to speak to me, Emily at rmgirl.co.uk or London at rms.org.uk. I'm always available. You can find my details pretty much anywhere. And I think the same goes for you, Christian.
Yeah, exactly the same. Well, obviously different handles, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And we shall bid you a good night. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
It was an incredibly